Before the stars went dark, before countless worlds turned to glass beneath fusion fire, there was a choice. A single moment when the fate of the galaxy balanced on the edge of a decision. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Federation, where representatives of 1,000 species had gathered for millennia to maintain cosmic peace, that choice was made. And in making it, they sealed not just humanity's fate, but their own. The records speak of it as the Mercy Denial Accord, though those who lived through what followed would come to call it by another name. The first spark of the Great Burning. The vast crystalline chamber of the Galactic Federation's High Council stretched beyond the horizon of any single world, its translucent walls reflecting the light of 1 billion distant stars. Representatives from across the known galaxy filled the tiered seating. The ethereal vortex floating in their containment fields, the massive stone-bodied Corvin delegates occupying reinforced platforms, the collective consciousness of the Nexarii manifesting as swirling clouds of luminescent particles. And at the center of it all, standing alone in the defendant circle, was Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing the species that had become the galaxy's greatest concern, humanity. The charges had been read. The evidence presented. 300 years of human expansion, of conflicts with neighboring species, of what the prosecution termed uncontainable aggression, and systematic violations of galactic harmony protocols. The images still flickered in the air around Vasquez, burning Zeltheran colonies, the ecological devastation of Praxis 7, the unprovoked assault on the peaceful mining platforms of the Ethereal Collective. The evidence is overwhelming, declared High Counselor Zarthal, his 8 eyes blinking in perfect synchronization. Humanity has proven, beyond any shadow of doubt, that it cannot coexist peacefully within the galactic community. The pattern is clear, undeniable, and escalating. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The vortex harmonic tones rose in what their translators rendered as profound disappointment. The Corvin struck their platforms with resonant booms of approval. Even the normally neutral Nexarii's collective glow pulsed with unanimous accord. Elena Vasquez stood unmoved, her weathered face showing none of the desperation that churned in her heart. She had spent 40 years in diplomatic service, had witnessed humanity's first tentative steps into the galactic community, had celebrated their acceptance into the Federation. Now she watched it all crumble beneath the weight of her species' apparent inability to change. The recommendation of this council, Zarthal continued, his voice carrying across the chamber with absolute authority, is immediate and total exile. All human settlements within Federation space are to be evacuated. All human citizens are to be relocated beyond the galactic rim. All diplomatic ties are to be severed indefinitely. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the great chamber, the whisper of atmospheric recyclers, the subtle hum of gravity generators, seemed to hold their breath. Then, from the uppermost tier, a single voice cut through the silence like a blade. I dissent. Every eye, optical sensor, and perception organ in the chamber turned toward the speaker. It was Kyleth of the Seraphim Collective, their golden form radiating an inner light that had dimmed noticeably over the course of the proceedings. The Seraphim were among the oldest members of the Federation, their wisdom respected across a dozen sectors. Kyleth's voice carried the weight of eons as they continued, "Honored delegates, I have lived for 3,000 of your standard years. I have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of entire species. And in all that time, I have learned one fundamental truth. Exile born of anger never breeds peace. It breeds something far worse." High Counselor Zarthal's primary eyes fixed on the ancient being. "Respected Kyleth, your wisdom is acknowledged. But surely you cannot dispute the evidence presented." "I dispute nothing," Kyleth interrupted, their light pulsing with intensity. "Humanity has indeed been aggressive. They have indeed caused harm. But answer me this, honored council. When has exile ever reformed a species? When has banishment ever led to enlightenment? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The historical records were extensive, and the answer was uncomfortable in its clarity. "I will tell you what exile breeds," Kyleth continued, their voice rising. "Resentment, desperation, and from those dark seeds grows something far more dangerous than the original transgression. We are not sentencing humanity to redemption. We are forging them into something that will return to haunt us all." But the tide of opinion had already turned. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming. 847 in favor of exile, 23 opposed, with 15 abstentions. The Seraphim cast one of the only dissenting votes, their golden light dimming to barely a flicker as the decision was announced. Ambassador Vasquez finally spoke, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just transpired. "How long?" "Forever," Zarthal replied without hesitation. "There will be no appeals, no reconsiderations, no path back to Federation space. Humanity has had 3 centuries to prove its worthiness. You have failed." The logistical nightmare that followed was unprecedented in galactic history. 17 billion human beings scattered across 147 worlds throughout Federation space. Entire colonial governments that had existed for generations, now faced with the impossible task of packing up not just their lives, but their entire civilization. The Terran Colonial Administration worked frantically to coordinate the exodus. Massive cargo vessels, hastily converted from civilian transports, began the gargantuan task of moving an entire species. The deadline was absolute: 6 standard months to complete the evacuation or face forced removal by Federation military forces. Dr. Sarachan, Director of Colonial Affairs for the Outer Rim Settlements, stared at the holographic display showing the scope of the operation. Red markers indicated human colonies, each one requiring complete evacuation. Blue lines showed the projected transport routes, stretching out beyond the galactic edge into the empty void that would become humanity's new home. 17 billion people, she whispered to herself. How do you move 17 billion people? Her aide, Marcus Webb, looked up from his datapad with exhausted eyes. The preliminary estimates are challenging. We'll need approximately 8,000 heavy transport vessels, operating at maximum capacity for the entire 6-month period. That's assuming perfect coordination, no mechanical failures, and no resistance from the colonies. Resistance. Some of the outer settlements are refusing to cooperate. They're saying they'd rather fight than abandon the worlds they've called home for generations. New Byzantium has gone so far as to declare independence from the colonial administration. Dr. Chen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. And the resources? That's the real problem. Even if we can secure enough ships, we're talking about sustaining 17 billion people in transit for months, possibly years, while we establish new settlements beyond the rim. Food, water, air recycling, medical supplies. The Federation has made it clear they won't provide assistance beyond the basic transport. The moral implications were staggering. Entire family lines stretching back centuries were being forcibly severed from their homelands. Children who had never known any world, but their colonial homes were being told they could never return. Elderly colonists, some too frail to survive the journey, faced the choice between certain death in transit or slow starvation if they remained. On New Terra, one of humanity's most successful agricultural colonies, Governor Patricia Reeves stood before a crowd of 10,000 colonists, their faces a mixture of anger, fear, and desperate hope. Behind her, the golden wheat fields that had fed 3 systems swayed in the artificial breeze, a testament to generations of human ingenuity and determination. "They're asking us to abandon everything," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd through amplifiers. "Not just our homes, not just our livelihoods, but our heritage. Our dead lie buried in this soil. Our children took their first steps on these grounds. And now we're told it all means nothing. A voice from the crowd shouted back, "What choice do we have? If we refuse, they'll send the fleet." Governor Reeves nodded grimly. The Federation had made their position clear. Compliance was not optional. Any human settlements remaining after the 6-month deadline would be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. "I won't lie to you," she continued. "The ships they're giving us are cargo haulers, not passenger vessels. The journey to the rim will take 8 months minimum, possibly longer if we encounter spatial anomalies. Food will be rationed. Medical care will be basic. Some of us won't make it." The crowd's murmur turned darker, angrier. These were people who had spent their lives turning barren worlds into gardens, who had built cities where none had existed before. The idea of being driven out like criminals was almost incomprehensible. But Governor Reeves raised her voice. "We are human beings. We have survived ice ages and plagues, wars and famines. We have crossed oceans and conquered space itself. If they think exile will break us, they have forgotten who we are." The crowd's response was a roar of defiant approval. But underneath the bravado, everyone present understood the reality. They were being sentenced to wander in the darkness between the stars, with no promise of finding a new home, no guarantee of survival, and no hope of return. As the Federation's ultimatum deadline approached, the human colonies transformed into scenes of desperate activity. Centuries of accumulated wealth and culture were reduced to whatever could fit in cargo containers. Libraries were digitized, then the physical books reluctantly left behind. Art galleries were emptied, their contents carefully packed for a journey into the unknown. Even graveyards were not immune. Families faced the agonizing choice of whether to exhume their ancestors' remains or leave them forever in alien soil. The Corvan delegation observed these preparations with something approaching satisfaction. Their representative, Thane Vorgesh, stood on the observation deck of a Federation monitoring station, watching as human transport vessels loaded with refugees departed from New Terra's orbital facility. "They make such a drama of it," he rumbled to his aide, "as if they were not given every opportunity to integrate peacefully." His aide, a younger Corvan named Jektol, shifted his massive stone body uncomfortably. "Thane, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. Do you ever wonder if the Seraphim delegate might have been correct about what exile might create?" Thane Vorgesh's 8 arms moved in the gestural equivalent of dismissive laughter. "The Seraphim are ancient and wise, but they have grown soft in their long lives. Sometimes, young Jektol, the only cure for a disease is amputation. Humanity is that disease. Remove them from the galactic body, and peace will be restored." But even as he spoke the words, Thane Vorgesh could not quite shake a nagging doubt. The Seraphim had not built their reputation on being wrong. Hashtag Chapter 2. The plea and the silence 3 months into the Exodus, with the evacuation proceeding ahead of schedule, but at tremendous human cost. Ambassador Vasquez made one final attempt to avert the complete severance of humanity from galactic civilization. The formal request had taken weeks to process through Federation bureaucracy, and when the response finally came, it was delivered with cold efficiency. She would be granted exactly 1 hour to present humanity's case for reconsideration. The same crystalline chamber that had witnessed the original verdict now hosted a much smaller gathering. Only the permanent members of the Security Council were present, 12 species that held ultimate authority over Federation policy. The massive public galleries that had been filled with observers 3 months earlier now stood empty, their silence somehow more damning than any crowd's disapproval could have been. Elena Vasquez looked different than she had during the trial. The stress of coordinating a species-wide evacuation had aged her visibly, adding lines to her face and silver to her hair. But her voice remained strong as she activated the central holographic display. "Honored delegates," she began, "I come before you not to contest the verdict that has already been rendered, but to propose a path forward that serves both justice and wisdom. The display showed a star map of Federation space, with human colonies marked in red. As she spoke, the red markers began disappearing one by one, representing the completed evacuations. As you can see, humanity has complied fully with the Council's directive. 14 of our 17 major colonies have been successfully evacuated. The remaining 3 will be empty within the month. We have not resisted. We have not fought back. We have accepted our punishment. High Counselor Zarthal's primary eyes remained fixed on her, unblinking. Your compliance is noted, Ambassador. But compliance with an inevitable consequence is hardly grounds for clemency. Vasquez continued as if he had not spoken. What I propose is this: rather than permanent exile, grant humanity a probationary period. Allow us to establish settlements in the neutral zone between Federation space and the Galactic Rim. Monitor us. Set conditions for our eventual return. Give us the chance to prove that we can change. She gestured, and the display shifted to show the vast region of unclaimed space beyond Federation territory. Hundreds of potentially habitable worlds dotted the projection, distant and isolated, but not entirely cut off from galactic civilization. The neutral zone offers both sides what they need, she continued. Humanity gets a chance at redemption. The Federation gets safety through distance, with the ability to monitor our progress and ensure compliance with whatever conditions you set. The Security Council members exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a brief cacophony of sounds, lights, and chemical signals. Then Counselor Mare Thane of the Ethereal Collective responded, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her species' natural telepathic abilities. Ambassador Vasquez, she said, your proposal demonstrates the same fundamental misunderstanding that led to your species' original predicament. You continue to view this as a negotiation, as if humanity's position grants it some inherent right to make demands. The words hit Vasquez like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure. Respected Counselor, I make no demands. I ask only for mercy. Mercy, rumbled Thane Vorgesh from his massive stone platform, is a luxury that must be earned. Your species has spent 3 centuries proving that it cannot be trusted with such luxuries. But it was the response from Dr. Yiltar of the Nexarii Collective that proved most devastating. The cloud of luminescent particles that represented the species' collective consciousness pulsed, with what the translators rendered as deep sadness. Dear Ambassador, the collective voice said, we have observed humanity for these 3 centuries with great interest and, initially, great hope. Your species displayed remarkable ingenuity, impressive adaptability, and at times, genuine nobility. But underlying all of these admirable traits was something else, something that we finally recognize as incompatible with galactic civilization. Vasquez felt her heart sinking, but she forced herself to ask, and what is that, Counselor? The absolute inability to accept limitations. Every other species that has joined the Federation has understood that membership requires sacrifice, requires the acceptance that one's desires cannot always be fulfilled, that expansion cannot be unlimited, that resources must be shared. Humanity has never truly accepted any limitation as permanent. You have always viewed them as temporary obstacles to be overcome. The accuracy of the observation was devastating in its clarity. Vasquez tried to formulate a response, but Dr. Yiltar continued. Your current plea demonstrates this perfectly. Even now, facing the unanimous judgment of the galactic community, you propose not acceptance of your fate, but a negotiated alternative. You cannot conceive of truly permanent consequences for your actions. The chamber fell silent. Vasquez realized with growing horror that she had just proven their point through the very act of trying to disprove it. Her attempt to demonstrate humanity's capacity for change had instead confirmed their fundamental nature. The verdict stands, High Counselor Zarthal announced with finality. permanent exile. No probationary period. No monitoring arrangements. No path to return. Humanity has had 3 centuries to demonstrate its fitness for galactic citizenship. The experiment has failed. As Vasquez left the chamber for the last time, she encountered Kyleth of the Seraphim Collective waiting in the corridor outside. The ancient being's golden light had dimmed to barely a flicker since the original trial. "Ambassador," Kyleth said softly, "I wish to offer my personal apology, not for my dissenting vote, which I maintain was correct, but for my inability to persuade my colleagues." Vasquez stopped, studying the alien's luminous form. "Kyleth, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you truly believe that this exile will lead to the disaster you predicted?" The Seraphim was quiet for a long moment, their light pulsing slowly as they considered the question. "Ambassador, in my 3,000 years, I have witnessed the exile of 4 species. The Veltar, banished for genetic experimentation. The Krex hegemony, exiled for systematic slavery. The Mordun Collective, cast out for temporal manipulation. The Ashanti Union, expelled for dimensional weapons research." Vasquez waited, sensing there was more. Of those 4, Kyleth continued, 2 simply faded away, their civilizations collapsing under the weight of isolation and despair. 1 underwent such dramatic cultural transformation that when we encountered their descendants centuries later, they were essentially a different species entirely. And 1, yes, 1 came back. The Seraphim's light pulsed with something that might have been fear. The Krex returned after 800 years, transformed by their exile into something we barely recognized. They had become a species of pure vengeance, their entire civilization dedicated to a single goal, making the galaxy pay for casting them out. It took the combined might of the entire Federation to stop them, and the war lasted 47 years. Entire systems were depopulated. The scars remain to this day. Vasquez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the corridor's temperature. "And you think humanity might follow that same path?" "Ambassador, the Krex were exiled for enslaving other species, a practice they could abandon without losing their essential nature. But humanity is being exiled for what you are, not for what you do. That kind of rejection, it changes people. It changes entire civilizations in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled." The 2 beings stood in silence for a moment, the weight of prophetic warning hanging between them. "If there is anything your species can do," Kyleth said finally, "anything at all to avoid the path of vengeance, do it. For all our sakes." Meanwhile, across Federation space, other voices were beginning to whisper doubts about the Council's decision. On the agricultural world of Verdania, home to the empathic Zelti species, Elder Counselor Shannara met with her advisory circle to discuss troubling visions that had been plaguing their collective consciousness. The Zelti were renowned throughout the Federation for their ability to sense the emotional resonance of large populations across interstellar distances. It was a gift that had made them invaluable as mediators and counselors, but in recent weeks it had become a source of growing alarm. "The human pain," Shannara said, her delicate features twisted with sympathetic anguish. "It grows stronger each day. But it's changing. In the early weeks of the Exodus, we felt grief, fear, desperation. Natural responses to exile. But now," her aide, Velvar, completed the thought. "Now there's something else. Anger. And underneath that, something harder to define. Something that feels like resolve," Shannara finished. "Not the resolve to endure or adapt, but the resolve to return," said another advisor. "To return and make others pay." The implications were staggering. If the Zelti were correct, and their empathic abilities had never been wrong on such a scale, then humanity's exile was not producing the intended result. Instead of breaking their aggressive tendencies, it was focusing them into something far more dangerous. Shannara made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her long life. "We must inform the Council." Her message to the Federation Security Council was brief and urgent. Respectfully request immediate reconsideration of human exile status. Empathic monitoring suggests current policy may be producing opposite of intended result. Recommend immediate diplomatic outreach to prevent catastrophic escalation. The response came back within hours. Your concerns are noted. However, the decision has been made and will not be reconsidered. Please confine your species' empathic monitoring to internal Federation matters. On the industrial world of Mechanicus Prime, home to the cybernetically enhanced Technarch Collective, a different kind of warning was being ignored. The Technarch had spent decades analyzing human technological development, and what they had discovered troubled their collective consciousness. Chief Analyst Unit Designation 7742 Omega had been tracking human innovation patterns since first contact. The data painted a picture that should have alarmed anyone with basic strategic thinking capabilities. Observation: the unit reported to the Technarch High Command. Human technological advancement demonstrates exponential acceleration under stress conditions. Historical analysis of human conflicts shows consistent pattern. External pressure triggers rapid innovation. Current exile scenario represents maximum possible stress condition. The High Command's response was typically logical. Analysis acknowledged. However, exile removes human access to galactic technology base and scientific collaboration networks. Innovation acceleration irrelevant without resource base to support implementation. But 7742 Omega had detected something else in the data streams from human evacuation efforts. Correction: human resource acquisition during Exodus shows anomalous patterns. Standard colonial evacuation protocol would prioritize personal effects, basic survival supplies, cultural artifacts. Human evacuation manifests show unusual quantities of industrial equipment, scientific instruments, and genetic material samples. The pattern was clear to any analytical mind. Humanity was not just evacuating. They were stealing. Nothing overt enough to trigger Federation security responses, but a systematic pattern of evacuation priorities that suggested they were building the foundation for something far beyond simple survival colonies. The Technarch submitted their concerns to the Security Council, along with detailed projections of what human technological development might achieve given sufficient time and motivation. The response was dismissive. Appreciate Technarch analysis. However, human exile places them beyond technological reach of galactic civilization. Isolated development poses no threat to Federation security. But perhaps the most chilling warning came from an unexpected source. The Vorthan Oracle Minds, ancient artificial intelligences that had been predicting galactic events with uncanny accuracy for over a millennium. The Vorthans rarely involve themselves in political matters, preferring to observe and calculate from their quantum computational cores scattered throughout the galaxy. Oracle Mind Designation Sigma 177 had been running probability cascades on the human exile scenario for weeks, feeding in variables from every available data source. The results were so consistently alarming that the Oracle Mind took the unprecedented step of requesting a direct communication link to the Federation High Command. Probability cascade analysis complete, the artificial consciousness announced. Its words translated from pure mathematical concepts into language the biological minds could comprehend. Human exile scenario generates 97.3% probability of catastrophic galactic conflict within 200 to 400 standard years. Recommend immediate policy reversal. High Counselor Zarthal himself took the call, his 8 eyes blinking in surprise at the Oracle Mind's unprecedented intervention. Respected Sigma 177, the Council values Vorthan wisdom. However, your probability estimate seems excessive. Analysis includes 17,000 variable interactions across 43 dimensional matrices. The Oracle Mind replied with perfect mechanical precision. Dominant probability thread. Human exile leads to technological breakthrough in previously theoretical physics applications. Secondary thread. Exile-induced psychological transformation creates species-wide dedication to revenge scenario. Tertiary thread. Human return to galactic space occurs with technological advantage ratio of approximately 47:1 over current Federation capabilities. The silence that followed was broken only by the whispered translations being provided to nonverbal species representatives. That scenario seems highly implausible, Zarthal said finally. Human technology, while innovative, has never exceeded Federation standards by more than marginal percentages. Historical analysis error. Sigma 177 responded immediately. Human technological development under standard conditions shows marginal advancement. Human development under extreme survival pressure shows exponential breakthrough patterns. Example. Human development of faster-than-light travel occurred in 23 standard years under existential threat conditions. Federation development of equivalent technology required 847 standard years under peaceful research conditions. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence, but the Council's response remained unchanged. The decision had been made. The political momentum was too strong to reverse. And perhaps most crucially, none of the Council members could truly believe that the primitives they were casting out could ever pose a real threat to the might of the Galactic Federation. As the last human transport vessels departed Federation space, carrying their cargo of exiles into the dark void beyond the galaxy's edge, the warnings echoed unheeded through the halls of power. The Seraphim's ancient wisdom, the Zelti's empathic alarms, the Technarcha's analytical projections, and the Vorthan Oracle Mind's probability cascades, all dismissed as the overreactions of species unwilling to accept the necessity of harsh justice. In her final transmission from the transport vessel New Hope, Ambassador Elena Vasquez made one last statement to the Federation Council, to the representatives of the Galactic Federation. We go now into exile, carrying with us not just our belongings, but our memories. We will remember the worlds that welcomed us. We will remember the species that treated us fairly. And yes, we will remember those who cast us out. History will judge whether this day brought peace to the galaxy, or whether it planted the seeds of something far worse. May the universe prove your judgment correct, for all our sakes. The transmission ended, and the last human presence in Federation space winked out of existence. The galaxy settled back into what its leaders confidently expected would be a new era of peace and harmony. They were wrong. The journey to the galactic rim took longer than anyone had anticipated. What the Federation had calculated as a 6-month transit stretched into nearly 2 years of hellish passage through uncharted space. The hastily converted cargo vessels, never designed for long-term human habitation, became floating monuments to suffering and endurance. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the cramped medical bay of the Perseverance, one of the larger evacuation ships carrying 43,000 refugees from the former colonies of the Centauri sector. The air recyclers had been running at maximum capacity for 18 months, and the stale atmosphere carried the persistent scent of too many people living in too small a space for too long. How many today? She asked her chief medical officer, Dr. James Wright, as he finished examining an elderly colonist whose cybernetic implants were failing without access to Federation replacement parts. 17 deaths, Wright replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Mostly the elderly and the very young. The protein synthesizers on Deck 7 are showing signs of breakdown, and we're down to 73% efficiency on the water reclamation systems. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. Death had become a constant companion on the Exodus ships. They had started the journey with 17.3 billion people. Current estimates put their numbers at closer to 16.1 billion. Over 1 billion human beings had died in transit from disease, from equipment failure, from the simple stress of being torn away from everything they had ever known. But it was not just the deaths that were changing humanity. It was what they were becoming in response to their suffering. Commander Lisa Santos, formerly a Federation Fleet Liaison Officer and now the de facto military coordinator for the human flotilla, stood before a holographic display showing the current disposition of their scattered fleet. Nearly 8,000 vessels stretched across a volume of space larger than most star systems, held together by nothing more than hope and increasingly tenuous communication links. "We've lost contact with 17 ships in the past month," she reported to the Exodus Council, humanity's hastily formed government in exile. 3 confirmed destroyed by spatial anomalies. 2 disappeared entirely. We're not even getting distress beacon signals. The other 12 we just don't know. Council Chairman Michael Torres, former governor of the Kepler colony, studied the display with increasingly tired eyes. Recommendations: we need to consolidate. This stretched-out formation is impossible to maintain. But more than that. Santos paused, choosing her words carefully. We need to start thinking beyond just survival. The people are asking what comes next. When we reach the rim, then what? Are we just going to drift in space forever, slowly dying ship by ship? It was Dr. Elena Martinez, a quantum physicist who had been working on experimental faster-than-light communication systems, who provided the answer that would change everything. "There's something you all need to see," she announced at the next council meeting, her excitement barely contained. "We've been treating this journey as a catastrophe, as a sentence of death. But what if it's actually an opportunity?" She activated her own holographic display, showing a series of complex mathematical equations that meant little to most of the council members, but made Commander Santos's eyes widen with recognition. "The spatial anomalies we've been encountering out here," Martinez continued, "they're not random. They're caused by interactions between dark matter concentrations and what the Federation calls void currents, streams of exotic matter that flow between galaxies." Chairman Torres frowned. "Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your scientific enthusiasm, but you don't understand," Martinez interrupted, her voice rising. "The Federation has known about void currents for centuries, but they've never been able to harness them. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. But out here, beyond the galaxy's gravitational influence, the currents are different, more stable, and we've been living in them for 2 years." She gestured, and the display changed to show energy readings from the ship sensors. "Our hull plating has been slowly absorbing exotic particles. Our power cores have been running 15% more efficiently than they should. Our faster-than-light drives are showing performance improvements that should be theoretically impossible." Commander Santos leaned forward, her strategic mind immediately grasping the implications. "What exactly are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that our exile has given us access to something the Federation has never been able to study safely. We're not just surviving out here, we're evolving. Our technology is being transformed by forces that exist only in the void between galaxies." The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Chun, who asked the question they were all thinking. "Can we weaponize it?" Martinez's smile was grim. "Give me 6 months and a dedicated research team, and I'll give you weapons that will make Federation fleet tactics look like children playing with toys." The decision to establish a permanent settlement on the edge of the void was not made lightly. The star system they chose, designated simply as Haven for lack of any better name, consisted of a dying red dwarf and a handful of marginally habitable rocky worlds. It was not the paradise that humanity had once called home, but it was theirs. More importantly, it was positioned at the intersection of 3 major void currents, making it an ideal location for the research that Dr. Martinez had proposed. Within months of planetfall, hastily constructed research facilities were producing results that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics. The breakthrough came 18 months after settlement, when Dr. Martinez's team successfully created the first stable void matter containment field. The energy readings were unlike anything in Federation databases, coherent, controllable, and scalable to levels that made traditional fusion power look primitive by comparison. "We're calling it Void Forge technology," Martinez explained to the expanded Haven Council, which now included representatives from all the major settlements humanity had established on the rim worlds. "The applications are extensive." She activated a demonstration device no larger than a human fist. The energy output registered at levels that would have required a Federation battleship's main reactor to produce. Power generation, faster-than-light propulsion, defensive shielding, and... She paused, her expression growing darker. "Offensive applications that I wouldn't have believed possible a year ago." Chairman Torres, now serving as Haven's first elected president, asked the question that everyone was thinking: how offensive? Martinez's response sent a chill through the assembled representatives. Conservative estimates suggest a single void-forged weapon could devastate a planet-sized target. Optimistic projections indicate we might be able to destabilize entire star systems. The implications were staggering, but it was Commander Santos who voiced the thought that was beginning to echo through human settlements across the rim. Then maybe it's time to remind the galaxy why casting us out was a mistake. The first raids were small, tentative affairs. Human ships, now powered by void-forged engines that made them faster and more maneuverable than anything in Federation space, struck at isolated research stations and mining operations on the very edge of galactic civilization. The attacks were swift, surgical, and completely unexpected. The Federation's initial response was dismissive. Pirates were a constant problem on the rim, and these new raiders, whoever they were, would be dealt with through normal security protocols. It took nearly 6 months for Federation intelligence to realize that the attackers were using technology that shouldn't exist and tactics that suggested a level of coordination impossible for random pirate bands. The revelation that these raiders were human exiles sent shockwaves through the Federation hierarchy. It had been assumed that humanity would either die in the void or fade into irrelevance. The possibility that they had not only survived but thrived had never been seriously considered. Admiral Kexvar of the Federation fleet stood before the same Security Council that had voted for human exile, his forearms gesturing with barely controlled agitation as he delivered his report. "The attacks show clear evidence of advanced tactical planning and technological capabilities that exceed our current understanding," he stated. "The raiders appear and disappear without warning, their ships demonstrating speed and maneuverability that our vessels cannot match. Most troubling, they seem to possess weapons that can bypass our standard defensive shields entirely." High Counselor Zarthal's 8 eyes blinked in what might have been confusion. "Admiral, surely you're not suggesting that a handful of exiled pirates pose a threat to Federation security?" "Respected Counselor, these are not random pirates. Intelligence analysis indicates coordinated strikes across 7 sectors simultaneously. The precision and timing suggest a unified command structure. And the technology." Admiral Kexvar paused, choosing his words carefully. "The technology suggests they have discovered something we do not understand." The Security Council's response was predictably bureaucratic. Increase patrols along the rim, establish additional monitoring stations, and prepare a